Olivia Troy, Sarah Matthews, Mark Lauder, all Trump White House vets. Two of them now campaigning for Kamala Harris, which is unusual. Former chair of the entire RNC, 09 to 11, Michael Steele, familiar to our audience, has joined the conversation. And I promised responses, but I want to play something else that Kamala Harris just said briefly about why, Mark, you were just having this exchange with your former colleagues, why so many at a high-ranking level, including Vice President Pence, who was off the ticket because of what went down that Trump fomented on Jan 6, why that has shook up this race so much. Let's take a quick listen to this new from Kamala Harris.
The people who worked the closest with Donald Trump when he was president, worked with him in the Oval Office, saw him at play in the Situation Room. His chief of staff, two secretaries of defense, his national security advisor, and his former vice president have all said he is dangerous and unfit to serve.
So I'll let you respond as promised earlier, Mark, but that's the other thing. You have a difference with people on the panel, but you also have a difference to some degree with Vice President Pence, who's off the ticket and is not out there campaigning for Donald Trump.
Well, I think that's one. I mean, this is one of those things where I think we see democracy in action. I mean, Mike Pence put his name on the ballot. He and many other people said, I offer a different way forward. And the voters in the Republican Party said no. They want to bring back the success that we had under Donald Trump. And if you look at the polls right now, the vast majority of Americans, and you could even argue almost a majority of Americans overall, are saying they want the success, the affordability, secured border, safer world that we had under Donald Trump. And for the folks that January 6th is their deciding point, they've made their decision. But I think for many people who are, especially those who may still be a little bit undecided, they're probably saying, no, maybe I don't like everything he ever tweets or everything he said or the tone he's used, but I can't afford not to put him back in the White House.
Michael?
They may be saying that. I think there's a significant number of people who are saying that. I think Mark's right about that. I think they're wrong. I think that there's more at play here than questions around policy, because arguably there is no straight line of policy out of this administration. There was no infrastructure bill. There was no reform of health care. There was nothing on education. There was nothing on small business. And to the extent they talk about what came out of the Senate around opportunity, economic opportunity, largely white business owners took advantage of that. That was not something that we saw that played out in Detroit, Atlanta, Philadelphia, Baltimore, where you have significant communities of interest who were not touched by Donald Trump, which is the great irony now, talking about those communities wanting Donald Trump to come back to give them what they got before, which was what? I don't know what that was. I've been to enough housing projects to know that Donald Trump did not leave an imprimatur there from his administration in reforming how those people live their lives every day. And I also know that the same Donald Trump actually, in terms of public housing, the buildings that he built didn't want black folks living there. So that's also part of the record in the history. So there's a lot here that people have to take into consideration when they're looking at the next president. For me, it's very simple. It's very simple. When the man running for president of this country says he wants to be a dictator, full stop, I'm done. I don't give a rat's behind what else he's done, because that tells me how he sees the country and how he sees the future of the country, with him as the center of it. So I have a very, very thin line, and I know, folks who are inside the administration, my buddy here is, very close to Trump world and all that stuff. Y'all do your thing. But at the end of the day, the question you have to ask yourself is, when you wake up a year from now and your neighbor is no longer there because they were summarily taken out of their homes in the middle of the night and deported, when people in the political space have disagreed with the administration and suddenly they're being audited, the Department of Justice is on their backside, et cetera, if that's the country you want, then Trump's your man, because he's telling you that's what he's going to give you.
Well, and Michael's hitting something, Olivia, that's come up in both of the conversations we've done. Sarah was at the last one. The other guests here are new. Policy sometimes is offered up by Trump supporters as if it's on par with Constitution, rule of law, and democracy. But those are prerequisites to policy, aren't they?
Yeah, and I just, I'll say this, Ari, it didn't take a January 6th for me to part ways with Trump. Right? It started way before that. Because for me, the president was not representing the greater good of the American people. while he sat in the Oval Office. When you're holding back disaster relief from people that are desperately in need of it, that's a problem. You're not serving the greater good. You're not being the president of the United States in that role. You got to take the partisan hat off. He is incapable of that. That, for me, was a red line right there. When it came to the immigration, you talk about immigration and strong border security. Obviously, I care about that. I spent my entire career in national security. But what was it? It was a policy of extreme deterrence, a policy of child separation. Where are we on that today, right?
More
what is it
kids
proposing?
now under this administration than under Trump.
Well, they have not been able to reunite them.
No. The ones they allowed in.
When they
Let's
lost the
speak
kids.
truth
But
now,
they wanted
Olivia.
to kill the bipartisan border deal.
Yeah.
The bipartisan border deal was garbage.
It was the most funding for the border in
No. Chad Wolf, your
If he
former
actually
boss,
cared,
who I
if he
worked
actually
for,
cared about
opposed
securing
it
the border,
before.
and then
Hang
he thought
on.
it was a crisis,
Chad
he would have
Wolf,
done it.
former Homeland Security Secretary that you worked for, opposed it before Trump. Speaker Johnson called it dead on arrival because it allowed 2 million illegal immigrants
Speaker
into our
Johnson
country.
That is actually
Unveiled.
incorrect. That
For
is
the record,
inaccurate.
I got 90 seconds. Michael,
Speaker
briefly,
Johnson
then
called
Sarah.
it dead on arrival after a phone call with Donald Trump. He was not publicly on the record dead on arrival
And
before
and
that
I'm-
phone call.
I got to move it around. Sarah?
What I will say, too, is that I went to go work for Donald Trump because I wanted him to be staffed by people of good character. And I believed in a lot of the policies that we enacted during a first term. But I think that something in him broke after he lost the 2020 election. I think he started to unravel. He stopped listening to the people who were telling him the truth that he lost, and he started listening to the people who were feeding him conspiracy theories. And guess what? That's what a second Trump term is going to look like. He's going to be surrounded by the people who won't push back on his worst instincts. You're not going to have the Mark Espers, the John Kellys, those kinds of folks there. And I think that that is concerning to me, and that is why I also can't support him in a second term.
We have 60 seconds, so I'm doing lightning in a sentence. What you think should be said to conservative voters who are still wavering in this election in a sentence.
What future do you want for your children and future generations of our country? One of doom and gloom, divisiveness, hateful rhetoric, and violence? Or do you want a brighter future where we're standing together and paving a better way?
We can get back to normalcy if we turn the page on Donald Trump. I would love to go back to debating policy, but when you have someone who's willing to light the Constitution on fire, then I don't think that we can debate policy.
You know what you get with Trump. You get an affordable economy, you get a secured border, you get a safer world. Kamala Harris is trying to turn the page that she wrote. And when she was asked what she would do differently, nothing. You get 4 more years of the same.
What would Lincoln, Eisenhower, Teddy Roosevelt, Reagan, Bush do?